Okay, I think we should get started now. So thanks everyone for joining. And this is our third session, this AI Jam series that we just started in September. And today we're going to have another panel of experts to talk about implementing AI breakthroughs effectively and the infrastructure to your AI. So before we get into the panel discussion, let me just highlight the fact that the HP developer community runs a number of series each month. We have the so-called Munch and Learn that we run. We started this in 21, in January 21, the meetups and this new series, the AI Jam. So the meetups and the Munch and Learn, just a quick update on what they are. The meetups are, the Munch and Learn are more like thought leadership type of sessions delivered by HP, vendor and product agnostic. We have a session coming up on November 20th. My colleague Denis will put the links to the registration page for this one in the Q&A. This is going to be about how to fix your biggest security hole. This is done by our fellow Ted Dunning. It's going to be an extremely interesting session. I really suggest you register to that one. We also have those meetups. As I said, they go into more details about a particular product. It's delivered by HPE, but not only. We have a session delivered by some of our partners. The next session for the meetup will be in 25. We don't have a session in December, so we'll have for sure a session in February on the 26th about HPE GreenLake webhooks. And I'm still working on the January meetups. There will be a session for sure. Stay tuned. We'll provide you with more details. Denis will also paste in the chat or in the Q&A the meetup calendar page, the Munch and Learn calendar page, and the Get Real with AI Jam calendar page. On this one, you'll see that we have an upcoming session in December for the last AI Jam for 24, and it's going to be on December 11th, and it's going to be called Picking the right software for your AI use cases. So expect another panel of experts and a good discussion on December 11th. You can register to that one through those links that are on the Q&A right now. And with that, I think that's about it for me, and I will hand it over to Audrey as our host for this panel discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much. So here we are today. Welcome, everybody. My name is Audrey Scribner. I will be your host today. We have some very interesting guests with us. Shep Bostein, Enterprise Architect for our federal sector, and one of 50 AI Ambassador worldwide for HPE. Tyler as well, one of our esteemed AI solution engineers. Both in customer-facing roles, helping customers every day implement AI solutions with HPE, and probably a familiar face for our regulars here, Anthony Delicali, focusing on the voice of business development here and helping customers with innovation and growth strategies. So Shep, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself in your own words.
Well, as you said, I'm Shep Bostein. I'm a customer-facing enterprise architect, AI ambassador. I focus mainly on public sector in my day-to-day work, although I end up working with some folks across disciplinary within HPE. So I'm sort of answerable to the customer on these things, not just being conceptual, but actually being things that we can help them to deliver to fulfill their various missions. So that's who I am.
And Tyler, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Audrey. Tyler Britton. I said I am a AI solutions engineer working in our private cloud for AI team. And I came to HPE about 2 years ago as part of a acquisition of an AI software company called Pachyderm. Similar to Shep, I spend my time day to day working mostly with customers on their specific AI use cases.
And Tyler, what's the fun descriptor for?
So I like to I've probably some would argue too many hobbies. I'm a serial hobbyist, so you know, whether I definitely got into all the pandemic stuff like baking sourdough bread and all that. I have my pilot's license to go snowboarding,
Wow.
brew beer, play golf. Too many hobbies.
Okay, I thought I had a lot of hobbies, it sounds like. Sounds like we're one and the same there. And Anthony?
I'm desperate to learn how to bake bread, just FYI. Yeah. Anything that's like magic to me. Anything that rises like that, so I'm gonna hit you up for that. Audrey, thanks for the for the invite and then the brief intro. I do spend most of my time. I'm Anthony Delicali. I'm in our office of the CTO. I spend time with our innovation and incubation team. So I think I have sort of the best company, the best job at the company, rather, in that I get to work with really early access technology and programs with some of our most strategic customer as we try to mature and then could quickly validate, how we bring net new services to the market. This topic and today in particular, is super timely as we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT. I call it the December 22, where, clearly we've raise the bar and awareness on everything AI, and we look forward to how this discussion and our audience is sitting on this revelation in terms of moving what I've been describing as pivoting to production, sort of the next generation of infrastructure for AI. So Audrey, I look forward to today's conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great segue too, to just kick us off to look at these organizational AI maturity levels. So I think there is this sentiment that a little bit of this fear of missing out, we could call it, this AI FOMO, that every other company is so much farther ahead. And I think the reality, Shep, when we're talking about these maturity levels, is that it really varies greatly across this spectrum. So I'm wondering if you could just comment a little bit on what you're seeing with customers and where they're at in this paradigm.
Yeah, I mean that is certainly the case. I think that clearly an enormous number of organizations are just right there at the left of the diagram in step one. They're aware of AI. It's impossible not to be, as Anthony pointed out. ChatGPT sort of dropped this bomb in the middle of all parts of society and grabbed headlines everywhere um and so even people who didn't know that there was such a thing as artificial intelligence beyond the movies had to become aware of it. And the question is, how far along on the journey are most customers? In my experience, the vast majority of customers are kind of in that step one or two of their journey. Some, the more advanced ones, have moved on to step three. Very, very few that I encounter, at least, are beyond that sort of middle of the road on their journey, because it's the technology, although it's shockingly not that new. um, it is nonetheless really just come into its own and become more viable in these most recent years.
Yeah,
That's the key part, Shep, right? Shockingly not new. I had in a customer workshop not long ago, I had our CIO of a partner company describe it that way. It's like, ChatGPT sort of woke up the boardroom, but we've been doing this for 30 years, and all of a sudden, there's this rush to do more. And I think you're absolutely, right in that rush has really spelled out a lot of experimentation, but not necessarily rich use cases that are driving to production. And I think that's sort of the evolution and next steps where we're at today as well.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
one sort of angle I've seen this, if you took this kind of this maturity level chart and then overlaid, say, for example, organization size, I think you'd see it be the opposite. So the larger your organization, the more you are to the left for the most part. Obviously, there's exceptions where the companies that are 4 and 5s, it's because they're AI companies, right? So they're newer startups where most of their core business is driven by AI, whether it's things that do like medical billing assists, or there's some companies, think about the companies that do things like recording webinars like this and doing transcriptions and all those things. A lot of them are pretty pervasively using it. So it's interesting to see. So when we talk to some customers, they're really in the large side, and they're like, oh, they're assuming some of their peers are maybe further along, and it doesn't seem to always be the case.
Yeah.
That's very true. You see there are smaller, more nimble companies doing things like autonomous robots for various tasks, or creating, maybe they're trying to create AI-based systems that other large companies will buy, but their customers are, are our customers, and they're much more to the left of that curve. I think Tyler hit it right on the head.
Mhm. So we have a poll for the audience to put up on the screen. So you should see kind of our first poll question there, just checking in to see how everyone resonates with this paradigm and where your organizations and yourself are at the moment. So you can select two, up to two, and there's a various one as well if you think that maybe it's mixed across your organization as well. I think that, Tyler, what you said about, and Anthony, we've been doing this for a long time. And, even under our systemic box there, we say, using machine learning. And I think it's been fascinating. We went from using machine learning, just ML, and all of a sudden it became everything was AI. And we used to say AI ML and just ML, and now it's just AI. And I think that the lingo is really indicative of what we're seeing, because as you said, Anthony, it really just woke the board in organizations and everyday consumers as well, up to what this technology is doing and how it's showing up in everyone's lives now. Okay, so let's see what these results are from the poll. Well, I think that confirms it. Sounds like we have consensus here. Yeah, many are in this awareness stage, and then lots within the active and somewhat in the operational. The operational might be a little bit higher, Shep, than maybe we expected. So it's interesting to see how maybe more organizations are shifting a little more right here every 6 months potentially.
Well, of course, that's a low bar, one project in production. So
we did set it low. Yeah. Okay, well, next time we'll set it to 3 and we'll see what happens for everybody. Thank you all for responding. So within this, let's take a look at this workflow. So a basic workflow and obviously a startling quote. I think all these quotes about AI are just overly alarming in many ways. So it says that enterprises that adopt these next generation technologies are 2.5 times more likely to increase revenue by 10x, with the big caveat of you need to invest in the infrastructure to fully reap the benefits. Like, yikes, and that's just one of them. I think every quote I read about all of this research is some alarming numbers like that. And when we look at the different workloads that require different infrastructure, I really see this diagram as looking as like a top down on the columns. So underneath these disks are really a whole column of infrastructure necessary to deliver on this one area. And we've spent so much time in the past on data acquisition and preparation, right? That was like the last decade. And now it's table stakes to get to that purple circle for any kind of model development. Tuning, half tuning, RAG, like every other parameter tuning, like every other format of working with language models and generative AI. And then comes inferencing as well. So Tyler, I'm curious to know how you see this workflow happening with customers, but also how you're just seeing it in the community, right? Like, how are people interacting with this? Where are they getting stuck? So that one project, where is the hurdle there?
Yeah. So I think this is an area. So, we both talked about how, hey, ML is not that new, neither is AI. But then we talk about ChatGPT as being this like huge marker in our history of this space. And I think the reason is the difference there with specifically with LLMs are you don't need to be a data scientist to leverage it. It helps to understand how these models work and their structure, and especially if you want to tweak it or tune it or something like that. But actually using it is pretty self-explanatory. So I think where we see these workflows sort of change is um, customers that were doing some of these things with traditional models. They have this, how do we carefully split up our data for testing and training our models, and constantly fine tuning them and evaluating them. Whereas what we're seeing is that go up a level with LLMs is it's not so much on the model itself, but it's the app they're building with it. So, hey, we're using an LLM to do something like answer internal questions or something like that. So then they need to get the data together to feed that application, do the inferencing with the model, and then also evaluate, are the answers good? It's less about checking hyperparameters and tuning them or something like that. It's more about, do we have the right prompt? Are we getting the right answers? Those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then to your question about like where do people get stuck? I actually see the biggest piece is like very early. They just don't even know where to start. So they're like, hey, we potentially have some use cases. Maybe like, oh, let's look. Oh, there's all these different, which model do we pick? Which framework do we pick? How do we deploy it? Do we use a cloud provider? And they just get, overwhelmed by the choices.
Hmm.
Where have you seen, people be successful getting through that?
I think, key thing and like we try to do is help customers think through these things and hopefully shrink that set down to a reasonable amount of options of like, yeah, there's 500,000 models on Hugging Face, but you're probably going to use one of these three. Like
Mm-hmm.
which one, based on maybe license or use case, like which makes sense. Um, where they get really successful is picking, kind of easy wins, right? So what's an either lower risk or easy to solve problem with AI to get started? Because part of it is building that internal muscle memory around doing things with AI because it's new, and then building from there versus like picking this like super impressive crazy use case, but it's really complicated. It might take you a couple of years to get to production. Let's start getting value now. So picking some of those lower hanging use cases, simpler architectures, and get something providing value.
Yeah, I think Tyler hit the nail on the head there in that problem definition is key. Pablo Picasso famously said that computers are useless. They only give you answers. I think the questions are what's important. To the extent that we can guide customers to choosing problems that are well suited to nicely defined solutions within the AI space. And then, as Tyler said, help them to navigate this huge library of available models. I mean, I think that's really the answer to that question of what changed that suddenly made this stuff become mainstream. Well, instead of having to build things from scratch, like Tyler was describing with all the tuning and so forth involved in building a model from scratch, today for a lot of use cases, we can grab something off the shelf and it's either ready to go or it with just a little bit of tweaking, it can be ready to go for our organization because we have a need that 100 other organizations have had in the past.
Tyler, can I poke at this a little bit? Are these initial projects that you're seeing customers struggling with, are they net new sort of digitization projects, or are there things that they're already doing? They're already measuring something, they're already automating a process, and they're leveraging a different tool chain to do that now. Which category is it falling into, and are they getting stuck in these net new projects, or is it in the tech in developing, something they're already doing, but they're trying to leverage some new tech to do it.
I think from my perspective, I think it's mostly net new because that's part of the attraction to things like LLMs is they can enable new ways of building things that you just couldn't do before. So just even like the concept of chaining, chain of thought type systems to have a AI-based system take multiple steps in a problem where, if you were, doing something more traditional, it would be fairly complex to code something like that up. So I think it's opening new use cases. Um, I think there's definitely some where they're like, we already do this thing, this could make this thing better and faster. And I think even those cases, both of them still deal with the same challenges of because all of these, whether it's the model themselves or all of the pieces around it, are new to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've seen the same thing in our customer engagements as well, in that they're tackling some sort of net new process automation, right? And I'd like to take it even a step further beyond the tech, is what I'm going to call the comms side. So they have to package up a business case and then communicate to a set of stakeholders on why we need to invest here, right? And I think we're seeing customers getting stuck there as well, where an ability to actually matriculate that into a business case and be able to message that and get support, whether that's, budget or otherwise, is another point of contention right now where a lot of our customers are getting stuck. Well, I don't know, Shep, if you're seeing that, especially in the
I,
federal space, are you
I'm
seeing?
gonna push back on it on part of that actually, because a lot of what um, I find myself doing is getting customers to look at processes, and I guess it also I'm biased toward those customers who are in that phase 1 or 2 that we talked about, which from the stats is probably 2/3 of the folks on this call as well, um, where I encourage them to choose some process that they are doing
Mm,
that is already being measured,
mm,
and then um, try to improve that process first, because we already know where the data set is. We already measure what we're doing there. So if you think of things, mundane things like customer support types of problems, or um, you know, faster lookups of information, things of that nature, where we do these things today, we already know how long they take or how much resource they consume. And if we use AI to reduce duration or consumption of resources, then we now have a specific and measurable impact that we can then use that ROI justification to go to the folks with the money to say we should do more of this stuff. I think the innovative and experimental things are great, and if you're in an organization that's prepared to make some big bets and take the chance of schedule issues and failures and things of that, um, then great. But most organizations are not as aggressive at that. And so I think that they like the idea of biting off something that's easy to swallow and see an ROI. That's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, and that use case I think plays really well into our next topic here, between these producers and the consumers and this different paradigm. So we've already talked about, being on this like left and the right of awareness and transformational. And then we talked about that workflow journey. And as part, Tyler, you mentioned that workflow journey where, and Shep, you were saying this too, that we're not, there's very few organizations really looking at building something from scratch, really. You're going to Hugging Face and you're pulling models or existing models, and then you're fine tuning them to get started on a use case that you're already measuring, you're already implementing in some way. Um, so Shep, I'm curious if you can walk us through this life cycle where you see this adoption is and how this plays into the use cases that are coming to fruition.
Well, I think the the message here is not surprising given some of the things that the group of us have been talking about. I think that the perception is that to get started in AI, you're always kind of at the left of this life cycle. Oh, I've got to build a model from scratch. I've got to pull together all of my data sources. I have to do all this tuning and testing, and perhaps at one point that was true. That essentially to do anything in AI, you had to be a producer. But as we glide further toward the right of this diagram, and Tyler earlier mentioned that Hugging Face is hovering somewhere now around 500,000 available models. There are models on GitHub, and of course there are the large language models, some of which have downloadable forms, like Llama has different versions you can download. As there's more of these off-the-shelf pieces and parts and tools, more people can become AI consumers. They can simply say, I have some data here. I'm going to grab this model off the shelf and I'm going to get started, and then I can scale from there. And so they're either at the far right here, just total off the shelf, or maybe they're doing, as we say, kind of in the middle, they're doing a little lightweight tuning, customization of the overall model and environment and data pipeline, um, because it's necessary, but they're not all the way to the left anymore of, oh gosh, I want to do AI. Let me roll up my sleeves and get ready to start slinging some code because it's the only way to do it. When I did a thesis in something we didn't even call AI over 30 years ago, we called it expert systems. I literally had to write the code from scratch. There was nothing, there were no tools. It was taking concepts and coding it. Today, you can pull these things together like building blocks, and you can be an AI consumer much more quickly than you can producing something from scratch.
I think that plays into the conception too that, if you are going to be an AI producer, therefore it's going to require a huge capital investment, and, get in line for as many GPUs as you can sign yourself up for. And that's it's fairly daunting. And we have some questions in the chat too about this, like, estimates for newcomers to just build like a chatbot or a chat operational chat function. And in your mind, if you think that AI is going to be, building a foundation model, then that cost is going to be overwhelming as an entry point, and then, your project will never get off the ground. But so it's really a difference of a paradigm shift to say, AI is approachable for everyone. There's an entry point for everyone, and you just have to move right in this diagram to say, okay, how do we take off the shelf models? What kind of light half tuning can we do to make this operational? What infrastructure can I start on, and what infrastructure should I end on? I think that, when we get to the inference, it's not a mistake, obviously, that, the inference and deployment is on that right-hand side of the consumer side, because that's where the bulk of the workflow is going to lie. And one question about, the public cloud services and, leading companies starting there. I think if you look at those implementations, you got to scroll down a little bit farther in the doc just to know that as soon as those inferences, take off, you're paying for tokens, and you're paying for every ping, right, to that endpoint. So it's something to keep in mind when you're going from pilot or a demo, build something to get buy-in. And then when you go to deploy it, that is a different type of infrastructure that you might need to scale or even reach a global level.
Yeah, and I think to put a fairly fine point on sort of the cost estimate piece of it is, if you said, yeah, hey, we need to train our own model from scratch, our own foundational model, you're probably talking in the, easily seven figures, right, of hardware, and then an ongoing operational cost that's pretty high, to get something that's competitive, which companies were doing a year ago to some degree because there was a requirement. The off-the-shelf models just couldn't compete with the service provider ones and things. We've seen a lot more of a compression of like the scoring of the models, where you see like the latest Llama 3.2s and things like that score pretty close to some of the very large foundational models. So now if I want the other end of the spectrum is, hey, cool, I want to run Llama 3.2 in my data center, you're talking like low six figures, right? Instead of high seven figures. So, you could, as small as a single server, you could be running a fairly, with a couple of GPUs in it, running a fairly capable model.
And I think that's the wonder that happened, right, in December 22 with ChatGPT. When we woke up the boardroom, we made it personal to the individuals in that boardroom. They saw firsthand what democratizing this type of tech does to their lives. And I think that translates to where the bar is now. The bar is, look, we need to pivot to the right here, right, of the slide, and look for ready-made infrastructure, and then compliance-driven models, right? I think of those two worlds starting to harden around ecosystems and vendors clearly that, are bringing, ready for production infrastructure to get you up and running quickly, as you start scaling up the balance of your teams to the right side of the slide. So it was a great service to the community, because I think the boardroom, when they take things personal, Audrey, I think it does, ultimately drive, prioritization of, how these turn into strategic initiatives over time. And we're clearly starting to see even board members of our member companies insert themselves into these innovation processes now, trying to get a better understanding of how quickly their respective companies are moving, and becoming very engaged as a result. So very much striking a chord on a personal note at the boardroom.
Yeah, that's was my first like whoa moment with ChatGPT. Obviously, we work in the space. I was aware of it, as it was, coming out and things like that, and had interacted with it. But very how quickly non-technical people were saying, "Hey, I was using this ChatGPT," and the one that always sticks out in my mind is one of my friends is a real estate agent, and she said, "Oh, I use ChatGPT to like help construct a listing, a description for a listing," and I was just like, wow, this is real. People are really, trying to solve problems themselves with this pretty quickly. So that was like a big eye opener for me.
Some of that really packaged up. I think the speed, it's like the ability to adopt went from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. Like it normally in some of these technology life cycles, they take longer. The early adopters, quote unquote, spend more time being the builders. And I think we've moved just so much faster into being able to consume. There's, just based on how many models are out on Hugging Face, how much code availability there is, how many tools there are for getting started. There's just a plethora now of resources that would have taken so much longer, I think, in the past than it has now. And so it's a good time, I guess, to be more of an AI consumer, and you don't need to be a producer. So with that, we'll move into an example. So finding where to start. So this was one of our first scenarios of how to be a consumer. And I think, Shep, you brought this one up in terms of not having, these are some of the conditions on the left are what we see. This is kind of the archetype of where you might be at personally too, in your organizations, and where you can get started. So let's talk through this one a little bit, and let's just set the scene on what kind of archetype or project this might relate to.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which hopefully at least some of the folks on the online are familiar with, is effectively taking that large language model front end, taking a small large language model, which I know seems oxymoronic, but one that will fit on a single server or perhaps a couple of servers, and then augmenting the responses that you get from that model with your actual data. So we talked earlier or mentioned earlier about a customer support type of situation that you might have in your organization where um, someone's calling in and they need answers to questions. And today, we have databases and knowledge bases, and people sit there and they type their queries and they try to get you an answer based on the accumulated information. Today, we can marry that large language model front end so that we can pose the question to that front end, and then we get an answer that's not only constructed by the large language model, but it's augmented with our actual data and documents. So it says, oh, the answer to your question is this. And by the way, here's the citation of the sections of the manual that explain how to do X, Y, or Z. And these systems are surprisingly easy to implement these days. There's lots of tools to do it. There's, scripts that people like Tyler have written that help with the process. There are companies that have sprung up to create platforms like this to make it easy to stand up these RAG use cases. So, as we touched on before, the costs of firing up an AI system like this, which once were, could have been well into the seven figures, are now in the low six figures. You need a server or two and some data and a few tools that you can put on it, an operating system, and boom, you're up and running. Can you do some of these examples even in cloud environments, as one of the people raised in the Q&A? Um, Possibly, at least a first cut. You're gonna, probably run into some issues pretty quickly depending on how much data you have and whether your company lets you put that data into a public cloud environment. Companies like HPE and many other big companies certainly will not let you do that. But I think where we're seeing the real sweet spot here is that folks are finding, well, heck, in the low six figures, I can stand this thing up and start using it and benefiting from it. This is the straightforward use case that's really starting to get very popular with a lot of customers across the board.
Yeah, Tyler, do you think that, so as we move from left to right in this diagram a little bit, how do you see some of these RAG use cases, whether it's on like structured data, unstructured data, the management of that? Like, I know that you've built some of these pipelines already. Can you walk us through, what that day in the life really looks like and how you've seen it be successful as well on, even just, let's just say a few GPUs?
Yeah. I think the most common sort of simplest kind of as Shep was talking about is, we have documents, right? So I have a bunch of documents and we can kind of chunk them up and then use an LLM. I had one customer consider the search pieces, the semantic search using the embeddings and everything as fancy Control F, right? So they're like, we need to find things in documents. So this does it in a more, intelligent manner. And then getting the summarization, everything from the LLM, it's fairly straightforward. Beyond that, getting into the structured data, this is, I think, an area that we're seeing a ton of growth because we have customers that have even just like BI systems, right, with tons of information in it, and people want to ask questions. If their dashboards don't answer the question they already want to, they want the answer for, they have to put a request into some BI team or a vendor to say like, hey, I really want to know this. How do I do that? I don't write SQL queries. Like I don't know how to get that information. Where now they're using RAG as a way to basically convert that question to a query and then get the answer. So, it's sort of democratizing BI a little bit to some degree as well, where people are just looking for a more human interface to their data. And that's where the combination of the LLMs and the embedding models can translate that to the right interface for them to get the data they need and give them the answer they want. I think that's like a strong starting case, and it's also a really good foundation to build on that. So you say like, well, I want to know this, like for example, I had a customer who they're doing this with databases, and they have like a couple different databases where they get data. So like, this is great. I can ask questions from this database. I can ask it from this database, but the user doesn't know which database the answer is in. So like now they're talking about building chains on top of that to say, let's figure out based on the user's question, which database we should be asking, or if we have to ask multiple and pull it together. So that's like, it's a really great like foundational starting point is passing a large language model that you can run locally, like you said, on a couple GPUs on a single server. That's what this customer is doing. And get an initial value, where, hey, I can ask questions and get answers to like, now this is the foundation where I can build more advanced apps on top of it without completely starting over.
Well, I love that example, Tyler. So as a best practice, we've seen customers struggling just with data discovery across their estate, right? Is that a best practice you're seeing customers use fundamentally the LLM for discovery, which is what I thought I heard you describe?
It can be. What it can do is what we see LLMs, if you focus on like what they're really good at, right? They're good at extraction, summarization, those types of tasks where you can say, here's a chunk of context, pull the answer out of this, or like, here's a huge document, give me the high level bullets. So when you can apply those types of things across a large data set, you can just speed up that process where, if like you find an external hard drive on your desk, right? And you're like, what is in this? And you plug it in and you start clicking through folders and opening documents to try to remember like what this even is. Like, that's basically, you can have an LLM do that for you, right? Like, look, open all these documents and just give me a rough idea of like what's on this drive. You're like, oh, it looks like some old resumes and some pictures from some trip somewhere or whatever. And I think you can see that rolling up to more advanced use cases for data discovery. I haven't seen a ton of that yet, but those are the types of, kind of what we would consider data toil of like very repeatable but kind of boring tasks. That's where we see like the LLM power really come through.
We have one question. Oh, I think it was answered. One question in the chat about kind of that sustainable AI portion and what happens when you get to scale. Shep, I think, did you answer that one?
Yeah, I tried to answer that one in the chat with respect to, we address that in a couple of different ways, at least at HPE. If people need more clarification, we can get further into it. But I think we've got some demonstrated innovation, and some of it's specific to us, but frankly, the first bullet point I think is more of a general bullet point that for the kinds of AI systems that we're talking about here, that our customers are using today, not the Bitcoin mining and all of these things that are a whole other discussion topic, but these everyday AI systems, as the GPUs and CPUs and so forth get more powerful, yes, they consume more power individually. But if I can accomplish today with a single server what used to take me a rack full of gear, it's a net improvement on the carbon footprint and the physical footprint of the gear, because maybe I can get it all done in one rack, or at most two racks when we look at some of our high-end PCAI solutions, and that used to take a whole room full of gear. So we are making improvements, particularly in the areas where most of our customers are operating.
Yeah, I think the other side of it too is there's obviously heavy downward pressure on the models themselves, right? Getting more efficient. There's a lot of new techniques, some different quantization techniques to make the model smaller, faster, use less resources as well. And you're even seeing some of them, where models today that are 7 billion parameters are outperforming previous versions ones that were 20 billion parameters. So we're even seeing that down. Like the latest Llama 3.2 3 billion parameter model performs pretty much just as good as their Llama 3.1 7 billion. So less than half the parameter. So fits in smaller GPUs, runs faster. So I think you'll see that consolidation and tightening to reduce the consumption. I think they'll like, hey, we see, Microsoft signing, nuclear power plant contract stuff, is I think it goes back to sort of that producer consumer side, that the producers, they're really trying, they're on the bleeding and cutting edge trying to produce better models, and they're using tens of thousands of GPUs, hundreds of thousands of GPUs constantly, and they're looking for every additional, as Shep says, that as the GPUs get faster, they're looking for each of those to apply to get better models. Where as a consumer, you're looking to get more efficiency, so you want to serve more customer requests with the same amount of hardware. Where they're looking to get like improved performance, so they need to keep all of those as well. So I think there's people that are extrapolating out like, if Microsoft needs a nuclear power plant, what is every enterprise going to need? And it's not that.
I think also one other point I'll add to that, and it's really the job of those of us who work with customers and some of the folks on this call who are tasked with developing these types of systems, is right sizing the solution. There are those customers who they walk in the door and they've looked at the NVIDIA product line and said, what's the best, biggest, fastest, most kick-ass GPU that we can throw at this problem? And I give me 8 of those. And they don't think necessarily about the cost, not only in dollars, but in energy consumption. And it's incumbent upon us, both on the panel and on the call, as you work with your constituencies within your organization, to right size these solutions because the tools are so good. If I can accomplish with one server with 2 mid-range GPUs what I need for my objective, then great. And that reduces consumption both of dollars and of energy. And I think it's incumbent upon us to learn more about the different options so that we can make the right recommendations and not just think that every problem, it's like hanging a picture with a jackhammer sometimes, that people want to buy these massive systems to solve fairly pedestrian problems.
I think that's been clearly that's been our philosophy, right? From a solutioning perspective, right? Which is not just right size the solution, but right size the start as well, right? Because you're going to be building a cultural change as you deliver, these new, digital experiences, and change is hard, right? So you want to get started and you want to build stakeholder, support and value. So that's how we've conceptualized our roadmap and our solutioning around, in particular, private cloud AI, PCAI, is to right size to get started, right? And so, our theme has, over the past number of quarters now has been, how do we enable that conversation, right? That one that is about pivoting to production and pivoting with the right starting point as well, and building that culture of change. So I think this is very, timely discussion as we see many of our customers, trying to have that conversation now.
So we have one more scenario to get to before we wrap up. So this was our improving maintenance example and a ship inspection use case. And Shep, I think you brought this use case up. So do you want to explain this one a little bit? I gave this one a pseudo whiteboard layout here.
Right. And this, I want to emphasize, this is a real use case that was brought to us by a customer who does work in support of the Navy, and ships at sea come in, and there's a punch list of maintenance tasks that need to be done. It's what's called condition-based maintenance. and they have this huge punch list. And at one time it was literally on paper. Today at least it's electronic, and all the maintenance people have their little rugged laptops and so forth. But as Audrey's drawn in here, there's a lot of truly manual effort involved. There's not that much sophistication in how they divide up the tasks. It's sort of by okay, Bob, you're going to take the front of the ship, and Jane, you're going to take the back of the ship, and Fred, you're going to take the middle of the ship, and they take their lists, and then they kind of eyeball it, try to figure out what might kind of work well together, and then they hop in these little carts. Audrey's got little pickup trucks with wrenches. It's very cute. They look a bit more like golf carts, and they drive really far, like half a mile, um, a kilometer for our international. They're driving literally like a kilometer from the ship to the warehouse to get the tools and the parts, and then they drive back, so it's this very inefficient process, and it routinely runs behind schedule. And when it runs behind schedule, that has very real costs, not only in personnel and so forth, but the longer that ship is in the port just getting routine maintenance done, the less time it's able to spend out at sea fulfilling its mission. And so for them, and we're actively working with them on some AI systems to resolve this problem. This is a bit more of a custom built solution, so more toward the left of our producer consumer diagram. However, the payoff is huge because you're literally talking about saving weeks, possibly months of time that each of these ships spend in dock, getting maintained and repairs of various types, because now the AI system will prioritize and group those maintenance tasks. It will say, here's the tools and parts that you need. And then it will, even with retrieval augmented generation, and ultimately it'll be something we call multimodal RAG. It'll give you, here are the sections of the manual that are applicable that may help you in performing these maintenance tasks. And here's some links to videos that'll show you how the manufacturer of a given part or subassembly suggests doing the maintenance of that task in case you need to look that up. So they're sitting there with their rugged laptop, and right in front of them, they have all the guidance they need to be efficient. You're not replacing the humans who have to do the work, but you're removing a lot of wasted time that they spend just because optimizing this process is way too big for someone to just do it randomly, to just take the list and do their best. It's not efficient. So, and it's kind of, today, I think it was Tyler who said, you need a better control F when we were talking about this scenario. Today, it's like they pull up a manual and they can control F and they type in some terms and they look for what they need. Uh, Not that one. So they hit whatever the hotkey is. I think it's F3 in some applications to find the next one. And they keep doing that till they find what they need. I mean, just any of us who've programmed and looked things up in documentation, it's like this brute force control F and look it's so inefficient. So this is kind of a good scenario more toward the producer side of things, but where the payoff is huge.
Yeah, and it's a good example of this idea of tackling something that's measured already. So it's an existing process that you're immediately making more efficient. It can be measured. You're not trying to implement, like a whole new product, service, or idea built around the AI, built along like an AI technology. And in this picture too, I mean, it obviously brings up the need for infrastructure that's not centralized in a data center. I think we often think about, AI happens in really big places, like lots of servers, lots of racks, huge cooling, but at some point, AI will happen be it on the truck, be it at the ship. It will actually be a web of connected endpoints. And maybe there'll be, model updates, right? So ability to compute at the edge, infer at the edge, and then update back into a main, center for retraining even.
Yeah, it's sort of a federated model, if you will, where the model development and refinement is centralized, but the compute and inferencing is out at the edge where the work is getting done. So it's certainly kind of a federated learning environment for those who are familiar with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see this in different examples too. I love this like shipping example, any kind of maintenance. But these sites or these compute edges can be stores, they can be buildings, they could be fields. Like it is anything that your organization is doing that is dispersed can be a compute edge as well. I know we have one question in the chat, just to bring that up and wrap up here. If anyone can answer this one, for data discovery and enrichment apps or tools. Tyler, I'm not sure if you can answer that one before we wrap up here. Just a few takeaways. This is what we've been talking through. So, keeping this initial focus kind of narrow, working on projects that are measurable and preferably already being measured. Tyler, I think you brought up this 100% accuracy resistance about, you might have to you might have to decide, what needs to be 100% versus 80%.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that worth drilling into just a little bit, is that, if your use case is your end user has no idea what the right answer is, then you have to strive for that 100% accuracy, which can make it a lot more difficult to get to production. Whereas if your use case is even like Shep was talking about the ship use case, it's pulling together the relevant data and the location where it found it, and it's someone who does this job, so they're like, that doesn't sound exactly right. Let me double check that. Those types of things. So it's still speeding up their process and they're getting lots of value, but your LLM doesn't have to give a perfect answer every time.
Mm-hmm. And Anthony, that last one, focus on the pivot to production. That's your that's your mantra today.
Yes. Yeah, I think I've overstated it, but you know, we're seeing this dynamic, right, between our central IT customer and then their, satellite of stakeholders in the BUs in particular that want to be able to deliver, these types of services faster. And that dynamic is what we're managing through and really helping automate how you can build up these operational systems. So, look forward to more dialogue on subsequent AI jams around this topic, because I think it's where our customers are absolutely leaning towards now.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you everyone out in the audience for your time today. Thank you to our speakers, Shep, Tyler, Anthony. We appreciate your time and your expertise being here and connecting with customers and partners and our audience members out there. Thank you everyone for your time today, and that's all we have.